The heart monitor let out one long, piercing tone, cutting through the misery of my previous life, like a dull, rusted blade. In the final second before I closed my eyes, Ethan was standing beside my hospital bed. He turned to Madison and asked, "How much money does she still have in her name?" "Enough to keep the company alive through next year." Madison lowered her eyes to the asset list, one finger resting on the last page. "As long as the lawyers don't make it difficult, it should be enough." Ethan even tucked the blanket around me. "Welcome to revenge cookies. She died once already. The last thing she heard wasn't her fiancé calling an ambulance. It was him whispering to his lawyer first. When she opens her eyes again, she is back at the charity gala where it all began. The ring is still on her finger. The champagne is still cold. And this time, she is the one walking away. I knew that hand too well. 4 years earlier, it had slipped a wedding ring onto my finger. 3 months before my death, when the doctors first told him I might not make it, that same hand had held mine while he promised he would stay with me no matter how busy the company became. And while I lay there unable to move so much as a finger, he bent down until his lips brushed my ear. "Don't worry, Evie. The company will be fine." He still called me Evie. The next second, I sucked in a violent breath, as if I had burst through the surface after being trapped underwater. No antiseptic, no oxygen mask, no asset list in Madison's hands. Instead, a divorce agreement lay in front of me. Ethan sat across the dining table, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled casually to his elbows, his left hand turning his wedding band without thought. Cold late autumn, rain streaked the windows behind him. "Evelyn," he frowned, impatience sharpening his voice. "Are you even listening to me?" I stared at his face, young, healthy, no dark circles from the sleepless nights he would later spend begging lenders to keep his company alive. My phone screen lit up. The 14th of October, exactly 1 year earlier. Ethan pushed the agreement toward me. "The company is refinancing. For everyone's protection, we need to separate the marital assets first. A cleaner structure helps you too. Once this round of trouble is over, we can talk about us." That last vague promise had destroyed me the first time around. In my previous life, I had cried so hard my hand shook around the pen. I asked if there was someone else. I asked what I had done wrong. Desperate to keep him from leaving me, I even poured the last of my personal cash into the bottomless pit that was Callahan Freight. That money saved his company. I never made it out of that apartment alive. "Where is the pen?" I asked. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. Ethan blinked. "What? You want my signature, don't you?" I looked up at him. "The pen." He studied me for several seconds, then picked up the Mont Blanc beside him. He didn't hand it over immediately. "You are not going to read the terms first. Your lawyer wrote them. So I am sure you've already figured out how to squeeze every last thing you can out of me, and you are perfectly happy with the result." His thumb froze against the barrel of the pen. I ignored him, took it from his hand, and flipped to the final pages. The downtown penthouse went to him. I surrendered any interest tied to Callahan Freight's subsidiaries. Neither party would make claims on the other's future income. Then I found an attachment that had never appeared in my previous life. Termination of family asset support. My fingers paused on the page. Last time. Ethan still needed my private assets to plug holes in the company's loans, so he had made sure I never saw this document. This time, because I wasn't crying, begging, or trying to save the marriage, he was in such a hurry to cut me loose that he had handed me the very document that would cut him off from my money. Perfect. I uncapped the pen and signed smoothly. Evelyn Carter, not Evelyn Callahan. Ethan stared at the signature, his brow twitching. "You are in that much of a hurry to change your last name?" "It is the name I was born with." I closed the file. Nothing surprising about that. He watched me sign page after page. The tension in his jaw finally eased, as though he believed he had won. When I finished, he gathered the papers and even softened his voice. "I'll have accounting send you a monthly allowance until you are back on your feet." I snapped the cap onto the pen. "Keep it. You'll need it for your legal fees." I pushed back my chair and walked toward the front door. A pair of cream-colored heels sat beside it. Size 7, not mine. I said nothing. I simply nudged them out of the way with my foot so the door could open all the way. Behind me, the room went quiet. It was raining hard last night, Ethan said. Madison stopped by to pick up some documents. She changed her shoes here. I didn't ask. She is just the company's executive vice president of strategy. I turned and looked at him. His jaw was tight, his whole body braced for the fight he expected. He was waiting for me to scream, accuse him, make a scene. In my previous life, I had gone through his messages, questioned his schedule, and cried in his car until I could barely breathe. Now, I simply opened the door. Then tell your vice president not to leave her shoes blocking the exit. It is rude. As the elevator doors closed, I saw him still standing in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed his face. Downstairs, a dark gray Maybach waited in the rain. Nathan Brooks sat in the back seat with a thick folder open across his knees. He had been my grandfather's chief attorney, and he was the only person in the world who knew what I was actually worth. I climbed in and tossed the termination agreement onto his lap. Nathan read the title once, then removed his gold-rimmed glasses. They voluntarily terminated your family asset support. Ethan asked for it himself. Nathan put his glasses back on and flipped through the pages. Rain drummed against the roof. Does he understand what he just signed away? Clearly, his brain didn't make it that far. Nathan looked up, suddenly serious. The Alder Ridge revolving credit facility comes up for renewal next month. Without your assets supporting it, Callahan has a very large liquidity hole to fill. Then he can fill it. Evelyn. Nathan. I watched the neon lights blur across the rain-soaked window. Pull every loan document connected to the Callahan family. What are you planning? I stared at my own reflection in the glass. For now, nothing. Give the consequences time to arrive. My phone buzzed before I finished the sentence. Ethan. I answered. Did you sign the termination of family asset support too? There was a trace of panic in his voice. Yes. Why would you sign that? I glanced at Nathan and smiled. Because you put it in front of me, ex-husband. Ethan lowered his voice, trying to recover control. That was part of the standard package the lawyers prepared. The bank needs you to sign another confirmation tomorrow morning. You just have to maintain the existing support for 3 more months. It has nothing to do with our divorce. I switched to speakerphone. Nathan slowly looked up, amusement curling at the corner of his mouth. Ethan, I said, leaning back against the leather seat. You spent the entire afternoon making sure I was removed from your marriage, your home, and your company. Only heavy breathing came through the phone. And now you want me to crawl back and keep backing your loans. It is a procedural formality. Then I am sure you'll have no trouble finding someone else to sign it. I hung up. Less than a minute later, my screen lit again. This time it was Olivia Hayes, CFO of Callahan Freight. One message. Evelyn, we have a serious problem. I don't think Ethan has any idea what he just made you sign. 3 minutes later, Olivia called. Can you talk? Very comfortably. The termination is effective. The Alder Ridge facility renews next month. Without your assets behind it, our liquidity drops below the covenant threshold immediately. That triggers default provisions. I know. A beat of silence. Does Ethan know? I educated him about 10 minutes ago. What did he say? Papers rustled on her end. He actually came into my office, asking why his company's loan needed his ex-wife's signature. Nathan closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. That sounds painfully on brand for Ethan. I didn't laugh. Olivia took a breath. I am not calling to ask you to come back and save him. I just need to confirm one thing. This is what you want. 100%. Understood. Before she hung up, I stopped her. Olivia, if anyone pressures you over the next few days to write that this liquidity crisis happened because I became emotional and suddenly withdrew company funding. My voice cooled. Don't sign it. Put your name only on the numbers you are responsible for. The sound of typing stopped. Understood. There is something almost theatrical about an arrogant man discovering that the floor under him was never his to begin with. The next afternoon, Ethan showed up at my door. I had just moved into a temporary apartment. Half-open boxes covered the floor. The bell rang twice. Through the peephole, I saw him standing there. No, roses. Just a document envelope. At least this time he had skipped the performance of pretending to care. I opened the door but didn't move aside. Give me 10 minutes, he said. You've already used 10 seconds. His jaw tightened. He held out the envelope. Sign the confirmation that you'll maintain liquidity support for 3 months. It won't affect the divorce, and it won't add any personal liability. I didn't even raise my hand. Yesterday's agreement says our finances are completely separated. This is a transition period. How long? 3 months. What interest rate are you paying me? His brow jerked. Interest. You want to keep using my assets for free to make your financing statements look stronger. Ethan, if you want access to capital, pay market rates. That is how markets work. He stared at me as if I had become a stranger overnight. We were married for 4 years, until yesterday. The divorce isn't final yet. I gave a quiet laugh and leaned against the door frame. Then withdraw the filing. Go to court and tell them you want to stay married. Are you willing to do that? The corner of his mouth twitched. He had crushed the expensive envelope hard enough to crease it. I don't want to mix private emotions with the company's interests. You are the one who brought the company's mess to my front door. The elevator chimed at the far end of the hall. Ethan inhaled, then deliberately softened his tone. Come to the family house for dinner Friday. Mom wants to see you. We'll sit down as a family and work this out. Which family? His face darkened. Evie, don't start. Text me the address. He paused, mistaking my answer for surrender. His voice took on that patronizing gentleness I knew too well. Mom even told the kitchen to make your favorite French dessert. She remembers. Of course. I smiled. In 4 years, my elegant mother-in-law, Margaret, had never once managed to say the dessert's name correctly. How touching. Then I closed the door in his face. He clearly missed the sarcasm. Friday afternoon, Margaret's assistant delivered an enormous cardboard box. Inside were an old cookbook I had left at the family house, 2 framed photographs, a cashmere wrap, and a family portrait taken just after Ethan and I were married. In the photograph, I stood at the far edge like an afterthought, while Margaret held Ethan's arm and smiled more brightly than the bride. At the bottom of the box was a gold-embossed card. Dinner, 7 tonight. Let's give each other one final measure of dignity. At 6:58 p.m., I had my driver carry the unopened box straight into the Callahan family's sprawling suburban estate. Margaret answered the door herself. She wore a perfectly tailored navy velvet dress and pearl earrings that announced old money before she said a word. When she saw me empty-handed, her gaze paused on the box for half a second. Come in. Ethan was already seated in the dining room, along with Olivia and Madison, the vice president, who was supposedly just an employee. Madison was sitting in my old chair. It stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the setting sun used to fall across my left shoulder. For 4 years, Ethan had always made a show of pulling it out for me. Tonite, Madison's shawl hung over the back. Ethan saw me and instinctively started to rise. I walked past him, crossed to the other side of the table, and took the empty seat beside Olivia. The view is fine from here, too. When Madison stood to greet me, I narrowed my eyes. She was wearing a black couture dress, the pleats at the waist, the hidden clasp at the neckline. I had taken that dress back to the tailor 3 times the year before. In the end, I still thought it ran a little small, so I had never worn it. It had been hanging in the closet at the downtown apartment. Madison followed my gaze and touched her hair, a quiet challenge in her smile. Ethan said you left in a hurry and didn't need those clothes anymore. I hope you don't mind me borrowing it. I used to like it, I said. Her smile widened. The dress. I took a sip of water. It doesn't look nearly as special on someone else. Olivia lowered her head and took a very strategic drink. Ethan's gaze flicked over Madison before locking on to me. I thought you'd left everything in that closet as trash. You think a lot of things. Margaret snapped her napkin across her lap. We're not here to discuss fashion. What a shame. The first appetizer had barely reached the table when Margaret pushed a thick packet of papers toward me. Sign it. Maintain the liquidity support for 90 days. It costs you nothing. It is just numbers on a page. I didn't touch the papers. Madison set down her silver fork, putting on her most reasonable expression. Evelyn, this isn't only about Ethan. Thousands of employees depend on this company. You can't be that selfish. I turned to her. When did you become head of credit? Her smile froze. Enough, Ethan snapped. She cares about the company. So do I, Olivia said coldly. The table went silent. Olivia opened the financial report beside her. 90 days of support is not cost-free. Evelyn's private assets remain restricted, and the lender can request an extension. That is a material financial risk. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Olivia, we pay you very well to solve problems. I am solving the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Ethan's fork struck the china with a harsh clink. Evelyn, what do you want? Name your price. I don't want anything. Then sign it. I don't want anything from you, which is exactly why I am not giving you another dollar. Margaret's back went rigid. You really intend to punish Ethan with something this petty when the company is in crisis? I slowly turned the stem of my wine glass between my fingers. If refusing to rescue you counts as punishment, then maybe the Callahan family should calculate how many crises you've survived over the last few years, because I kept paying the bill. Silence. Madison was the first to look away. Ethan shot to his feet. Fine, don't sign. Callahan existed before you, and it will exist after you. Ethan, Olivia warned sharply. Am I wrong? Olivia closed the file with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. At 4 this afternoon, Alderidge formally suspended all new draws under our credit facility. Margaret's napkin slipped from her hand. Madison pulled her hand away from Ethan's chair as though it had burned her. Ethan grabbed his phone. 17. Unread messages, marked urgent. The bank requires updated proof of liquidity by Monday, Olivia said evenly. The color drained from Ethan's face. Margaret turned to me, her voice shaking. Evelyn. I stood, folded my untouched napkin neatly, and placed it beside the plate. Dinner was lovely, thank you. Ethan planted both hands on the table. You are just leaving. You said the company would be fine without me. I picked up my coat and smiled. I'd really like to see that. I had barely reached the foyer when Margaret hurried after me. Dignity forgotten. Wait. She pulled the front door shut behind us, blocking Ethan and Madison from view. I can have Madison removed from the company immediately. I stopped. Margaret mistook it for weakness and stepped closer. Move back in. You and Ethan don't have to announce a reconciliation. Just restore the asset guarantee. Once this financing crisis is over, I'll make him withdraw the divorce petition. I looked at her for several seconds, stunned by the absurdity of it. So that is your brilliant crisis plan, Margaret. I use my own money to buy back a used husband I've already thrown away. Her lips pressed into a thin white line. Something shattered behind the door. Ethan was standing on the other side. He had heard everything. Mom, Margaret spun around. I am trying to save your company by trading my failed marriage for it. You are the one who wrecked the marriage because you couldn't control yourself. For the first time, mother and son dropped the polished upper-class performance and glared at each other like strangers. My phone vibrated. Nathan. The risk committee just finished meeting, he said, calm against the night wind. Callahan has 7 days to provide additional collateral. When do you want the formal default warning served? My gaze slipped past Margaret to a gold invitation on the living room table. The Callahan Foundation. Charity Gala was the following week. Margaret's favorite annual display of family status. What time does the gala start? I asked. Margaret's face changed. Ethan stared at me from inside the house. I lifted the phone to my ear. Have it served at 6:55. On the afternoon of the gala, Margaret sent me 3 messages in a row, something she had never done before. I hope you'll respect the family's dignity. If you insist on attending, please don't dress in a way that attracts unnecessary attention. Do not create a scene that gives the press something to laugh about. I replied with one word, understood. At 6:48 p.m., I walked into the hotel's glittering ballroom. There was no red carpet and no press line. Just the people the Callahans cared about most. Longtime clients, major suppliers, loyal investors, and old family friends who had watched the company rise and stumble for decades. Margaret stood with a champagne flute, speaking elegantly, with the wife of a board member. Her smile didn't disappear when she saw me. Only the muscle at the corner of her eye jumped. Ethan stood a short distance away with Madison curled around his arm. informal evening wear. They looked every inch the polished corporate couple. I took a glass of sparkling water from a server and chose a corner with an excellent view. Madison came to me first. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show your face tonight." I considered staying home. "Wanting closure is normal," she said softly, with the pitying tone of someone speaking to an abandoned wife who couldn't move on. "I am not here for closure." "Then why are you here?" "To watch the show." Margaret hurried over and lowered her voice. "Evelyn, this is the Callahan Foundation Gala. Do not embarrass yourself here." "I know. I've donated plenty of real money to this foundation." She lifted her chin. "Tonight is not the time to revisit old grievances." "Wonderful." I checked my watch. 6:54. Ethan finally lost patience and came over. "We need to talk outside. After 7. He glanced at his watch. "What exactly are you waiting for?" 6:55. Right on cue, a serious-looking man in a black suit entered the ballroom. He walked past security, past the guests, and stopped directly in front of Ethan. "Mr. Ethan Callahan." Ethan frowned at the documents in the man's hand. "Who are you?" "I've been formally retained by Alder Ridge Capital to serve Callahan Freight Group and its principal guarantors with a notice of liquidity deficiency and a demand for supplemental collateral." He didn't raise his voice, but the effect moved through the room, like thunder. Conversation stopped in widening circles. Ethan snatched the envelope and tore it open. "We've never missed a payment. This notice is not based on delinquency," the process server replied. "Your family asset, support structure has materially changed, and you failed to provide replacement liquidity within the required period. You have 7 days to cure the deficiency. If you do not, the lender may accelerate the debt and begin enforcement against pledged assets." Margaret's champagne flute struck a silver tray with a sharp crack. Whispers erupted around us. "Alder Ridge, aren't they Callahan's biggest private lender? 7 days before enforcement. Are they going under?" Ethan flipped frantically to the last page. A vein stood out at his temple. The man who had served the papers turned and left. Margaret immediately looked at me as if I had set the room on fire. "What did you do?" Dozens of shocked, curious eyes swung toward me. I rotated the glass in my hand. "Nothing." Ethan looked up, his eyes blazing. "Don't play innocent. You knew exactly when this would happen, and you showed up just to watch. I did know the time, so you arranged all of this. I didn't write the default notice. You withdrew the guarantee. You put the paper in front of me and told me to sign it." Every word landed hard enough to make the room feel smaller. Ethan pressed his lips together, breathing heavily. Madison stepped forward, eager to defend him. "Evelyn, thousands of employees did nothing to you. Why are you willing to hurt all of them just to get back at Ethan?" I looked her up and down. "Are you representing the employees tonight?" Her face changed. "I am asking you to act like an adult." I set my glass down on the bar. "I signed the divorce agreement. He couldn't wait to hand me. I moved out without making a scene. I didn't even stop you from wearing my clothes and taking my seat. The only immature thing I am doing now is refusing to keep financing the 2 people who betrayed me." Around us, people found sudden interest in the floor, though their eyes were practically glowing with gossip. Madison flushed scarlet, then pale. Ethan barked. He turned to the guests and forced himself back into CEO mode, though his voice wasn't entirely steady. "Everyone, this is a temporary technical issue caused by a private marital dispute. Callahan is financially strong and fully capable of resolving it. Please don't give weight to rumors." Then he looked at me, his eyes cold. "We will not allow an emotional decision by an ex-wife to endanger the livelihoods of thousands of employees." The room went still again. He was trying to turn me into the unstable woman in the story, so no one would look too closely at his own decisions. Before I could answer, Olivia stepped out of the crowd, wineglass in hand. "That statement is inaccurate." Ethan snapped his head toward her in warning. Olivia ignored him. She set down her glass and looked around the room. Miss Evelyn Carter did not withdraw $1 of company funds from Callahan Freight. She terminated a free personal guarantee that she was under no obligation to continue providing. "Olivia," Ethan said her name through clenched teeth. "I am the CFO. I am stating the financial facts. An older investor with decades of experience frowned. Hold on. Are you saying Callahan's liquidity facilities have been supported by Evelyn's personal assets for years? Ethan jumped in. It was simply part of the financing structure. Olivia looked at him without sympathy. The company's last 3 critical debt renewals were backed by her assets. The ballroom erupted. The calm mask on Ethan's face finally cracked. Margaret rushed toward me and gripped my arm hard enough for her nails to bite. Come with me. I looked down at her hand. She released me immediately and walked toward a side corridor. The moment we entered an empty lounge, her composure collapsed. What do you want? Money. Shares. Why does no one in your family understand plain English? Because no normal woman would stand by and watch a 3-generation company collapse over a divorce. No normal family would throw a woman out of the marriage and then demand that she keep using her own money to guarantee her unfaithful ex-husband's debts. Her chest rose and fell as she reached for the only weapon she had left. Guilt. Don't forget everything the Callahan name gave you. The penthouse was Ethan's premarital property. The society circle was yours. Even tonight's gala is just another stage for you to display the family name. What about the luxury travel? The private clubs? The respect people showed you as Mrs. Callahan? Looking at her, I felt something close to pity. Margaret, do you know who put up the money every time the company was shut out by banks and close to collapse over the last 3 years? Do you know who protected that family glory you keep talking about? She had no answer. The door slammed open. Ethan stood there, eyes bloodshot, his tie pulled loose. He had apparently managed to contain the scene outside, but there was a frantic edge to him now. Enough, Mom. He looked at me. I'll fix it. Callahan doesn't need a cold-blooded woman like her. Margaret stared at her son. You'd better. I brushed a speck of lint from my sleeve and walked between them. Ethan put a hand against the doorframe. You'll hear from my lawyer tomorrow. I am suing you for intentionally interfering with the company's financing. Tell him to take a number. Evelyn. I stopped. His voice softened without warning, almost pleading. Do we really have to turn this into a war? For one moment, the waltz drifting in from the ballroom blurred the present with the past. He rarely used my full name before. During the first 2 years of our marriage, he always called me Evie. I remembered the year his father died. Ethan stayed in the office until after midnight. When I went to pick him up, he wrapped his arms around me in the parking garage, buried his face against my neck, and choked out, Don't leave, Evie. I don't know what I'd do without you. I looked at the man standing in front of me now. Ethan, you are the one who filed for divorce. You are the one who tried to send me away with nothing. His hand dropped from the doorframe. I left without looking back. Nathan's car was waiting outside the hotel. The second I got into the back seat, he handed me a tablet. It is getting lively. 3 banks requested additional disclosures. 2 major suppliers froze credit terms, and 1 investment deal that was about to close just died. Then he opened an internal Callahan email. From Ethan Callahan. Due to the emotional withdrawal of family support arising from a private marital dispute, the company is experiencing short-term volatility. Management is taking necessary steps to stabilize financing. All employees are asked to remain focused. He is still trying to paint you as an irrational ex-wife. Nathan said, Let him. You are not responding publicly. Capital markets don't believe tears. They believe numbers. The numbers will answer him for me. I was right. The next afternoon, at an emergency lender meeting, Olivia stated the truth in the simplest possible terms. Evelyn Carter did not withdraw $1 from Callahan Freight. She stopped providing uncompensated personal support. Ethan, however, had no intention of admitting defeat. 3 days later, Margaret was admitted to an expensive private hospital for observation after a severe drop in blood pressure. At 11 that night, I went to the hospital because she had insisted there was an old jewelry box containing something that belonged to me. According to the message, she refused to cooperate with treatment until I collected it. The elevator opened onto a nearly empty corridor. Ethan was leaning against the wall. He wasn't wearing a suit. His tailored shirt was wrinkled and open at the collar. When he saw me, he didn't flare up the way he had during the previous week. He only said, hoarsely, Evie. I slowed. He lifted his face. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. We stood about 10 feet apart in the quiet hallway. A vending machine cast a pale blue light against the wall. Ethan walked over, fed in a bill, and pressed a button. The can caught inside the dispenser. He hit the machine twice in frustration. I stepped over and struck the side in exactly the right place. A can of coffee dropped with a clatter. He looked at me and gave a tired, crooked smile. "You still know how to fix this stupid thing. The one under our college dorm was worse." He started to hand me the coffee, then remembered halfway through that I didn't drink sweetened coffee. Without a word, he put in more money and bought a black one instead. The movement was so familiar it could have belonged to any day of our 4-year marriage. We sat on the plastic chairs at the end of the hallway. Ethan didn't mention the company. He didn't mention Madison. He stared ahead. My dad died around this time of night. My mom sat where you are sitting now, holding my hand and asking what was going to happen to the company. His fingers tightened around the can. From that day on, the first thing I did every morning was check the company's cash balance. I was terrified. I'd wake up one day and see zero. That everything my family had built would be gone. "So you learned to check my balances too," I said. His eyes dropped. No polished explanation. Just yes. That single honest answer burned away the last small ember of resentment I still carried. At 1 a.m, I threw my empty can into the trash and stood. Ethan stood too. "I'll drive you." "Number, it is raining." "I have a driver." He didn't argue. He walked me to the elevator and pressed the button. Just before the doors closed, he looked up. There was a desperate stubbornness in his eyes. "Evie, those 4 years, it wasn't all fake. I did love you." The elevator doors slid shut between us. A man's feelings had never been stronger than his hunger for control. The next morning, Nathan dropped a confidential internal document onto my desk. Timestamp, 10:14 p.m. the night before. 40 minutes before, I had arrived at the hospital and listened to Ethan's moving confession about his fears. The document formally authorized Callahan's public relations team to continue feeding financial reporters the narrative that the company's crisis had been caused by an ex-wife maliciously withdrawing support. Ethan's electronic signature sat at the bottom. I stared at the timestamp for 10 full seconds. Nathan's expression was grave. "Has he found new money?" I asked. "He has." Nathan pushed another confidential file toward me. "A private equity fund outside Alder Ridge is willing to provide bridge financing." For the first time, Nathan didn't look amused. "If the money closes, Callahan's liquidity crisis is solved. Everything we've been setting in motion becomes much harder." This was not a bluff. The fund had issued a real letter of intent. The price was painful. Callahan had to sell a major interest in its North District distribution center. It was the one high-quality asset in the group, still producing stable cash flow. Nathan spread the proposed agreement across the table. "The fund is real. The money is real. If they accept this price, the liquidity hole can be filled within 7 days. Then let them fill it." Nathan stared at me. "You are not stopping it. If that money comes in, Ethan stays in the CEO chair." I turned to the last page and tapped one clause. "If he can save the company legally and cleanly, then he earned it. I'll accept that." Nathan frowned. "If your grandfather were alive, this would give him a blood pressure problem." If my grandfather were alive, an opponent like Ethan wouldn't be important enough for him to handle personally. 3 days later, a huge sum hit Callahan's account. The company genuinely seemed to come back from the edge. Suppliers stopped demanding immediate payment. 2 banks that had been preparing to pull back returned to the negotiating table. Board members who had spent the previous week criticizing Ethan suddenly started praising his turnaround. At an all-hands meeting, Ethan appeared in a flawless suit and announced, "The most dangerous phase is behind us. Callahan is entering a new chapter." Someone recorded the meeting and sent the video to Olivia. Olivia sent it to me. Madison sat proudly at Ethan's right hand. She was wearing my black couture dress. Margaret resumed her society lunches, and even called several old family friends to say, lightly, it was only a little marital disagreement. "I am sorry everyone had to witness it." Nathan handed me the tablet. "You don't look angry. She is having lunch. That is not a crime." I picked up my coffee. Let them celebrate. People make their worst mistakes when they're convinced they've already won. My attention had never left the sale price of the North District Distribution Center. 1 month earlier, Ethan himself had signed an internal valuation, setting the minimum acceptable price. The new rescue investor was offering $40 million less. No legitimate company sells its best cash-producing asset that cheaply without a reason. He is telling everyone the market deteriorated and valuations were revised, Olivia said over the phone, her voice dripping with disbelief. Do you believe him? I asked one question about the valuation model. He kicked me off the deal team. I heard a drawer slam on the other end. Evelyn, I've given 12 years of my life to Callahan. I know. When Mr. Callahan was alive, he had one absolute rule. No core asset could be sold without the CFO's final sign-off. Are you resigning? Olivia was silent for 2 seconds. I am finishing this quarter. Whatever happens upstairs, more than 2,000 people still depend on this company for a paycheck. The next day, at noon, I was in line at the grocery store downstairs when Ethan called, triumph pouring through the phone. Happy now. The entire business community is talking about how my ex-wife nearly drove a century-old company into the ground. You can issue a statement clarifying that I withdrew exactly $0 of company funds. You know people believe the version of a scandal they want to believe. The cashier handed me the receipt. I tapped my card. That is because you fed them that version. I was stabilizing market confidence. Then you should hope that confidence lasts. Evelyn, you were never this unreasonable before. I picked up my grocery bag and laughed. Ethan, before this, I was still living in that house where even the air felt fake. I ended the call. That afternoon, I instructed Alder Ridge to offer temporary restructuring terms. We would suspend the most aggressive enforcement actions for 7 days. In return, Callahan could not lay off ordinary employees, transfer core assets, or award any form of extra management bonus during the standstill. Nathan read my draft. You are giving them oxygen. I am giving 2,000 innocent employees room to breathe. Not Ethan, naturally. Took it as proof of his own brilliance. At the board meeting that day, he boasted that his hardline negotiating strategy had forced the vultures at Alder Ridge to make major concessions. Simone inside the company actually opened champagne. At lunch, Madison attended a private investor meeting beside him as one of the heroes who had saved the company. Margaret even introduced her publicly as an indispensable part of Ethan's future. When photos leaked, Madison was glowing, as though the title of Mrs. Callahan had already been placed on her head. But observant people noticed one thing. Her left ring finger was still bare. That evening, she sent Ethan 3 angry messages. I should never have known that. But the next afternoon, the untouchable executive vice president herself walked into the cafe, where Olivia and I were having coffee, clutching a manila envelope. She wore almost no makeup. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Olivia frowned at me. I didn't invite her. I know. I stirred my coffee. Madison came to the table, her expression complicated. Can I sit? You are already ruining the atmosphere. Go ahead. Her jaw tightened. She dropped the envelope onto the table. I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness. Good. That saves us both the nausea. And I am not here to help you. Then you are free to leave. She took a breath and pulled out the first document. Corporate registration records for the mysterious buyer of the North District Distribution Center. The second document was a set of confidential emails between Ethan and an intermediary. One line was impossible to miss. 6 months after closing, Callahan Freight will retain effective operational control through a nominee management agreement and will preserve a mandatory repurchase right at a substantially discounted price. Olivia's expression turned to ice. Selling it to themselves through a front. It is an asset transfer dressed up as a sale. Madison pulled out a third document and slapped it onto the table. A draft liability waiver and responsibility allocation agreement. The document assigned every possible violation in the financing scheme, including unauthorized misstatements and failure to disclose related party transactions, to the executive vice president, Madison. She stared at the thin stack of paper, her voice shaking. This morning, legal thought your ex-husband and I had already reached an understanding, so they sent me this to approve. You didn't sign. I am not that stupid. She gave a smile that looked painful. Ethan promised me that once you were completely out and the North District deal closed, I'd get a board seat. And this is what he was preparing instead. Olivia added, without mercy, A board seat was never going to be handed over simply because you had a private relationship with the boss. I know that now. Madison tossed another financial schedule onto the table. The stock options he promised me, he pledged all of them to other lenders 6 months ago. They were worth nothing to me, just another promise he never intended to keep. At last she looked straight at me, anger and humiliation burning together in her eyes. So don't mistake this for some touching women supporting women reconciliation, Evelyn. I want him to go down with the mess he created. I never assumed otherwise. Good. She picked up her bag and headed for the door. The café bell rang as she reached it, then she stopped. One more thing. Go on. Last night he came to my apartment because he was trying to calm me down. Olivia froze with her coffee halfway to her mouth. Madison looked at me carefully. He said that once the North District Bridge financing closed, he would permanently deal with the remaining problem. What problem? You. She let the word hang. He made it sound like he wanted you completely out of the picture, not just out of the company. I didn't move, Madison continued. That was when I finally asked him something. If you were really just a spoiled, emotional ex-wife living off a family trust, why would a firm like Alder Ridge care so much about your signature? What did he say? He went white, yelled at me to stop asking questions, and told me I didn't need to know. Her mouth twisted in a bitter smile. That was the first time I realized everything he'd spent 4 years telling me about you, that you knew nothing about business, that you were nobody, might have been a lie. You've been hiding more than any of us understood. After she left, Olivia turned to the final page of the buyer's background report. Who is ultimately behind the buyer? Ryan Cole, she frowned. Who? Ethan's college roommate's older brother. I opened the due diligence email Nathan had just sent. The buyer was a shell company created only 6 months earlier. One of its seed payments, $5 million, had come from an offshore investment account controlled personally by Ethan. Nathan called at exactly the right moment. Want to guess who personally funded the buyer's down payment? Ethan. He paused. How did you know? Because one of his former allies just defected across my coffee table. Nathan was silent for a beat. What an educational afternoon in the study of betrayal. I photographed every document on the table and sent them to him. They're scheduled to sign with Ryan at 9 tomorrow morning, Olivia said, checking her watch. Nathan spoke through the phone. Do we report it now and stop the deal before it starts? Number. I placed my phone face down. Tomorrow morning, make sure Ethan calls every board member into that conference room. I want him to state his own version of the deal on the record. And if he doesn't, then he finally learned caution. A little late, but still progress. The next morning at 8:57, I sat in the executive conference room on the top floor of Alder Ridge Capital, watching Callahan's decisive board meeting through a one-way encrypted video feed. Ethan had no idea I was there. He sat at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored suit, confidence restored. Margaret was behind him as the family representative. Olivia sat as far away as possible, her expression unreadable. Madison's seat, which should have been occupied by his closest executive lieutenant, was empty. Ryan Cole's video window glowed in the top right corner of the screen. 9 o'clock. Ethan cleared his throat. Directors, I want to state this one final time regarding the sale of the North District Distribution Center. The buyer's funding is completely independent. The price reflects current fair market value. There are no undisclosed related party relationships and no improper benefits of any kind. On my side of the screen, I nodded once to Nathan. He typed Ethan's words directly into the record. Got it. Bold choice. One conservative director raised a question. Has Alder Ridge formally approved the asset sale? Ethan smiled with complete confidence. They have not issued written approval, but they have not expressly objected. In finance, silence can amount to acceptance. The lender obviously wants us to save ourselves. Olivia finally looked up. Alder Ridge has never approved this transaction. They haven't rejected it either, Ethan snapped. Because you haven't completed the required disclosure. Ethan, if this financing doesn't arrive, are you personally paying thousands of salaries next month? Ethan slammed his pen onto the table. Then complete the damn disclosure now. Disclose what? You are the one insisting there is no related party. There isn't. I pressed the red conference key. Nathan's calm voice suddenly came through the executive room speakers. Sorry to interrupt. Alder Ridge has a significant objection. On screen. Ethan's shoulders locked. He looked around, startled. Go ahead. The first confidential exhibit appeared on the conference room screen. A wire record showing Ethan's offshore account, funding the buyer's shell company. Ryan Cole's face changed instantly in the video window. His head dropped as he started tapping furiously at his phone. The second exhibit appeared. Emails documenting the below-market mandatory repurchase, right 6 months after closing. Then the third. The nominee control agreement that would leave Callahan in effective control after the supposed sale. The boardroom erupted. Several directors who had supported Ethan stood up, shouting questions across the table. Ethan stared at the evidence, sweat gathering along his forehead. Then he turned on Olivia. Who leaked confidential deal documents to the lender? Was it you? No, Olivia said, looking at him as if the answer should have been obvious. Then Madison. At that moment, the frosted glass doors flew open. Madison walked in. She wore a sharp business suit. She did not sit down. She walked straight to Ethan and slapped the draft liability agreement onto the table in front of him. Looking for me, every trace of color disappeared from his face. For the first time, he completely lost control in public. Are you out of your mind? Do you understand what you are doing to the company? Madison laughed. Number, I finally learned to read everything you ask me to sign. You are welcome. Ryan Cole's video window went black. He had disconnected. The meeting collapsed into chaos. Ethan stood and shouted over the directors. Listen to me. She was involved in the financing process. Now she is trying to shift responsibility by turning on the company. Madison didn't flinch. Last night, in my apartment, you promised me we'd buy the asset back in 6 months and dump every legal risk on me afterward. You are lying. Do you have proof? Of course. She connected her phone to the projector. It wasn't an audio recording. It was a screen recording of Ethan using his private encrypted email account at 3 a.m. to confirm the process with counsel. There it was in writing. Ethan's face went gray. Nathan chose that moment to speak again, his tone calm and formal, because Callahan Freight materially concealed information relevant to the transaction. Alder Ridge formally rejects the proposed sale. Further, the attempted transfer of pledged core assets to an undisclosed related party without lender approval constitutes a serious material default. An independent director raised his hand, face hard with anger. I formally move that Ethan Callahan's authority over major asset dispositions be suspended immediately, and that the company open an independent internal investigation. A second hand rose. The motion passed unanimously. Margaret shot out of her chair. Ethan stopped talking. Come outside with me. He didn't move. He stared at Madison. I gave you everything, and you betrayed me. Her eyes were red, but her back stayed straight. You gave me worthless options you'd already pledged away, promises you never planned to keep, and a document designed to make me take the fall for you. She stepped back in disgust. Don't dress up your selfishness as generosity. I watched for another moment, then ended the video feed. The screen went black. Nathan turned his chair toward me. You are not staying for the rest. This is the historic moment his own board removes him. The outcome is obvious. Send me the minutes. Nathan didn't move. The humor vanished from his face. He opened the deepest encrypted folder and pulled out a yellowing printout of an old email. There is something else. You asked me to quietly investigate the asset authorization requests, made before your first serious hospitalization. I have the results. I took the page. The email had been sent more than 2 months before I received the first critical medical warning in my previous life. The subject line read, Extreme Family Liquidity Contingency Plan below. It were my offshore accounts, trust identifiers, and large life insurance policies. At the bottom was one cold question, written in English. If Evelyn is unavailable, what can be accessed within 72 hours? My fingers tightened around the edge of the page. Nathan watched me carefully. Evelyn. I looked at the sender, Ethan Callahan. For 1 second, I forgot to breathe. The night he sent that email, Ethan had come home unusually early with an enormous bouquet of white tulips. I remembered it perfectly. He had wrapped his arms around me from behind in our open kitchen. rested his chin on my shoulder, and told me in a tired, gentle voice that the company had finally survived its latest crisis, and that he would have more time to come home for dinner. I had covered his hand with mine and told him not to worry. The company matters. I can take care of myself. Now the truth cut through that memory with brutal clarity. That same afternoon, he had been probing my wealth management team, my accounts, my trusts, my life insurance. He wanted to know how much could legally become accessible to him if I became incapacitated or never came home from the hospital. Is there more? My voice sounded rough. Nathan silently pushed over a second document, a request to alter medical decision-making authority, then a third, a legal inquiry, seeking broader access to information about my trust assets. Some requests had been rejected outright by my trustees. Others had been partially honored because Ethan was, at the time, my lawful spouse. All of it happened when Callahan was less than 3 months away from a full debt default. He had run out of places to look for money and had started looking at what might become available if I could no longer protect myself. Nathan leaned back, fingers interlaced. How do you want to handle it? We can have the legal team evaluate whether any of this crosses into criminal conduct. These emails show intent and inquiry, but not enough by themselves to prove the worst possible allegation. I gathered the documents and locked them in the safe. I don't need years of litigation or a morality trial to reclaim my life. Nathan studied me for several seconds, then nodded. I understand. That afternoon, Madison came back. This time she brought no documents. Her eyes were swollen from crying. The company suspended me indefinitely pending the internal investigation, she said, sitting on the sofa. That is a reasonable procedure. You won't even say one word on my behalf. I looked at her. Why would I defend the woman who pursued my husband while we were married, and is now under investigation for transaction misconduct? She gave a miserable laugh. At least you are consistently ruthless. She sat by the window for a long time without touching her cold coffee. For years, Ethan kept telling me you didn't understand business, that you were some useless rich wife who only cared about shopping and beauty appointments. I said nothing. Every time he took you to a business dinner, you left early. He mocked you afterward for not understanding complex deals. When you skipped board family events, he said you were short-sighted and had no ambition. Her fingertips slowly traced the edge of the cup. So when he looked me in the eye and told me I was the only woman capable of helping him run his empire, she shook her head. I believed him. I thought it proved I was more worthy of him than the decorative wife he claimed you were. And now? I asked. Now I understand. He never wanted a powerful woman who understood business and could build something beside him. She turned toward the gray sky outside. Tears slid down her face without sound. He wanted someone who would never ask where the money came from, someone he could drain without guilt while she kept reassuring him that he was still brilliant. Then you chose the wrong role. You are too calculating to play that person forever. She gave a short laugh, apparently. A few seconds later, she looked at me again. Evelyn, I know what I did during your marriage was wrong, but he told me, repeatedly, that your marriage had been over for years, and that only the paperwork remained. He said going home to you felt suffocating. And you believed him. I chose to believe what I wanted to believe. She nodded slowly. There is a difference. I did not forgive her, but I no longer had the energy to humiliate her either. What she had done did not disappear because she had finally handed me useful evidence. When she picked up her bag to leave, she stopped at the door. The week you were first hospitalized, he asked me to organize a list of your private assets. My pen stopped in midair. When? The day after the doctors gave him the critical care notice. What did he tell you? He said your condition was deteriorating fast, and that all communication with your attorneys had to be centralized through him. Then he told me, very quietly, to make a list of what the company might be able to access from your medical trust, if you lost legal capacity. Was the life insurance on that list? Madison closed her eyes. Then she nodded. At the time, I told myself it was just an extreme contingency plan from a responsible CEO. When she opened her eyes again, they were cold. Now it feels like we were taking inventory. After the door closed, I sat alone in the enormous office for a long time. I didn't cry. What I felt was sharper than grief. It was clarity. My phone kept lighting up. Ethan had been pushed into a corner. Through his secretary, he requested 3 separate meetings with Alder Ridge's ultimate decision-maker. First, He offered an equity restructuring. Then he offered to resign as CEO. Finally, he proposed selling the Callahan family's cherished estate, along with the family's luxury cars and yacht, if the lender would ease the pressure. Nathan came into my office. "Do you want to see him?" I looked at the old 72-hour liquidity email on my desk. Yes, it is time he learned who he has actually been negotiating with. The meeting that would determine the Callahan family's future was scheduled for 10 Friday morning. Ethan arrived 20 minutes early. I sat at the head of Alder Ridge's main conference table, behind one-way glass, and watched his assistant escort him in. Less than a month had hollowed him out. He had lost enough weight that his custom suit hung loosely from his frame. Even his Windsor knot sat crooked. He clutched a thick binder to his chest. Before stepping fully into the room, he paused and tapped the uneven edges of the papers against the table until they lined up. I knew that habit. Whenever he faced something that genuinely frightened him, he organized whatever was in front of him so his hands would have something to control. Nathan opened the inner door and brought him in. My chair was turned partly away from the light. Ethan lowered his head and opened the binder. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I prepared a revised restructuring proposal overnight. Callahan is prepared to surrender a portion of management authority. Alder Ridge can receive a board veto, right? Provided that you still use long presentations to hide the fact that you are nervous." My voice carried across the conference room. His hands stopped. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Slowly, as if his neck had rusted in place, Ethan raised his head. First he saw me. Then Nathan standing beside me. Finally his gaze swept across the long, polished conference table. There were no faceless Wall Street power brokers waiting for him. Just me. Evelyn. He shot to his feet so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. "What are you doing here?" Nathan closed the heavy wooden doors behind him. Ethan's eyes dropped to the nameplate in front of me. Evelyn Carter, Managing Principal, Alder Ridge Capital. His Mont Blanc slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor. "Number," his voice barely carried. "That is not possible." I opened the first page of the restructuring plan he had worked all night to prepare. "You've spent days begging to meet the person who controls the debt tied to nearly everything you own." I folded my hands beneath my chin, so here I am. He stood frozen for nearly a minute. Then his knees seemed to give way, and he dropped back into the chair. He nearly slid off the edge before catching himself. "Alder Ridge belonged to your grandfather," he said, voice trembling. "It did. And now, it is mine. I control it." His eyes reddened as he stared at the nameplate. "We were married for 4 years. You slept beside me every night. You never told me. Because you never asked. I asked about your trust. You asked how much cash my trust could produce when your company was desperate. You never asked who actually controlled the capital behind it." His throat moved as though swallowing had become difficult. Nathan stepped forward and placed a thick file in front of him. When Callahan Freight nearly failed 3 years ago, the large private credit facility it applied for was acquired and restructured by Alder Ridge. Miss Carter did not participate in routine lending approvals because of the conflict of interest. But her family assets provided the underlying support that materially improved Callahan's credit profile and kept the company financeable. Ethan whipped his head toward me. 3 years ago. Yes. When our cash flow collapsed and we nearly lost the 10-year port contract, I approved the emergency facility. The next year, when the warehousing project went over budget and the bank started pressing us, I authorized the emergency extension. And last year, when no bank would increase our line by another $1, Alder Ridge added a $30 million cushion backed by my assets. With every question, his voice became quieter. Finally, he covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook. When he looked up again, his face was wet and completely undone. Why? What? If you had this much power, why did you help me in secret and pretend you knew nothing? Why let me believe you were just a sheltered wife? Were you testing me? Because at the time, you were my husband. That answer hit him harder than any accusation. His eyes filled. Evie, don't call me that. I leaned back. I don't want to hear it from you. His hand, which had started to reach toward me, stopped in the air and fell. I pushed his restructuring proposal back across the table. Read the new terms. His fingers shook as he turned the page. First, Ethan Callahan resigns as CEO due to material compliance failures. I continued. Second, a special committee of independent directors and lender representatives takes control of governance during restructuring. Third, non-core real estate, including the Callahan family estate, and all management-owned luxury assets pledged or available to the restructuring will be sold to repay senior obligations. Fourth, the North District Distribution Center remains in the company. It is a core operating asset and may not be sold. Fifth, wages, health coverage, and retirement benefits for ordinary employees take priority over any Callahan family distribution. I let him reach the next line himself. 6, and most important, Alder Ridge will convert part of the debt to equity. The Callahan family will lose control of the company. Ethan turned to the last page. His finger stopped over one clause. What happens to the name? Whether the company keeps Callahan is up to the next board. Callahan Freight was my grandfather's life's work. His voice rose into one final burst of anger. I looked at him steadily. You might have remembered your grandfather's legacy before you hid an affair in your office and started calculating how much more money you could pull from me. The fight went out of him. He lowered his head. When my father died, I woke up terrified every day. I thought this entire company was going to die in my hands. Banks stopped returning calls. The older directors thought I was too young to control the room. My mother kept asking when I was going to restore the family to what it used to be. A miserable laugh escaped him. And every time I thought I couldn't keep going, you somehow found money. You never demanded repayment. You never forced me to explain every bad decision. I became dependent on it. So you decided my money was your private emergency fund. He closed his eyes. Yes, and Madison. He rubbed his forehead. When the board was tearing me apart, she stayed in the office with me all night. She chased clients, begged suppliers for time. She made me feel like at least one person still thought I was some brilliant executive who could control the situation. So you crossed the line because you needed someone to feed your ego. Yes. And then you came home and kept using me to finance the life you were building with her. His answer was barely audible. Yes. I pulled the old 72-hour email from my file and threw it onto the table. And was this your ego too? The moment he saw it, his pupils contracted. His face turned white. What is this? This is the email you sent my wealth management team 2 months before my first critical hospitalization. The one asking what could become accessible within 72 hours if I wasn't available to object. He skimmed the first lines and panicked. Evie, listen to me. Callahan was facing cross defaults. As CEO, I had to identify every possible contingency. Contingency. I stood, both hands on the table. My offshore accounts were a contingency. My family trust was a contingency. Even an insurance policy that only mattered if something happened to me was a contingency for your company. I never wanted anything to happen to you. But you were already calculating what you could reach if it did. His mouth opened. No words came out. I straightened and calmly put the document back into my file. My attorneys have preserved the evidence of every request in which you used your position, as my spouse, to seek access, beyond what you were entitled to. Anything that belongs with law enforcement will be turned over. He looked at me helplessly. Do you hate me? I closed the folder. When I was dying in a hospital bed, maybe I did. And now, I have better things to do. Hating you would be an expensive use of my time. A broken laugh escaped him. You don't even think I am worth hating. Now you are understanding. There was a knock at the door. Nathan stepped outside to take a call. For the first time that morning, the enormous conference room held only Ethan and me. His hand shook as he removed the wedding ring he had continued wearing. He placed it on the polished table. The ring spun once, then fell flat. Madison resigned, he said quietly. She made her choices. She told me she didn't want to become the next person I used up. I raised an eyebrow. His fist tightened, then loosened. I always thought she understood me better than you did, that she understood business. But really, she just demanded payment for every ugly promise more openly than you ever did. You gave me everything and asked for almost nothing. So I treated you like the cheapest thing in the room. Save the breakthrough for a therapist, preferably one who charges by the hour. He gave another laugh that looked more painful than crying. You always did that. Every time I started turning my own speech into some heroic tragedy, one sentence from you could make me realize how ridiculous I sounded. Maybe your judgment is finally catching up with reality. The door opened again. Nathan placed a fresh resolution on the table. Special board meeting results. Ethan looked up like a man waiting for a sentence to be read. Olivia Hayes has been appointed interim CEO of Callahan Freight. The restructuring plan passed unanimously. Ethan's shoulders collapsed. Olivia, Nathan adjusted his glasses. At least the CFO has enough professional judgment not to sell a core asset to one of the CEO's friends at a suspicious discount. Ethan reached for a bottle of water. His hand shook so badly that half of it spilled before he managed a drink. My mother. The family estate was pledged in the prior default structure, so control of it transfers to Alder Ridge under the restructuring. Miss Carter has allowed her 90 days to relocate. She may take all personal belongings. Ethan closed his eyes and nodded. Thank you. It is not for you, I said. I have no interest in headlines, claiming I threw an older woman onto the street. I know. He put the water down. Then, for the first time, he looked at me without immediately talking about the company. Evelyn, is there really no chance at all for us to start over? The diamond ring lay less than a foot away. In my previous life, I had sacrificed my dignity, my money, and eventually my future for that ring and the promises attached to it. Even at the end, I had waited for him to look back at me once. Now the man who had taken so much from me sat across the table with red eyes while the empire he valued above everything else slipped out of his hands. I placed one finger on the ring and flicked it across the table. It slid back to him. Why did you never tell me who you really were? He whispered. Because I was naive. I wanted to believe someone could love me because I was me, not because of the mountain of money behind my name. His eyelids trembled. Tears fell onto his hand. I learned I had simply chosen the wrong man. Evie, please. I stood and smoothed the hem of my jacket. He rushed to his feet too. I'll resign. I don't want the company. I don't want the house. I know everything I am saying sounds ridiculous now, but I don't know. His voice broke. I looked at him. You don't know what? I don't know who I am if I lose you completely. The room went painfully quiet. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. That is the saddest thing about you, Ethan. He looked up through tears. For 4 years, you used silence, manipulation, and constant doubt to make me smaller. You turned me into an accessory, a place to dump your anger, and a financial safety net. As long as I stayed inside your shadow, you could keep expanding until you believed you were the man controlling everything. His lips had lost all color. Now you finally see me, and now you are terrified of losing me. But it isn't because you suddenly learned how to love me. I paused. It is because I stepped in front of you and took away the throne you thought was yours. That is not what I mean. I know what you mean. It simply doesn't matter to me anymore. I walked to the door and pulled it open. I will never shrink myself again just to protect your pride. You said you don't know who you are without me. I glanced back. Figure it out on your own. Then I gave him the clean separation he had once demanded from me. 3 months later, Callahan Freight completed the first phase of restructuring. The company did not collapse. The North District Distribution Center remained one of the busiest hubs in the logistics network. As interim CEO, Olivia cut several bloated management layers and killed 2 expansion projects that had been bleeding money. She protected the jobs of the truck drivers, warehouse staff, and other frontline employees. The first day she moved into the CEO's office, she called me. I've always wondered something. If your grandfather had that much capital, why didn't he simply buy Callahan years ago? He had a saying. As long as the founder's descendants still listen when the financial statements tell them something, investors don't need to grab the steering wheel themselves. Too much work. Olivia was quiet for a second, and if he had personally evaluated Ethan, then he probably would have taken control of the entire company 3 years ago. Olivia laughed out loud. The board ultimately voted to keep the Callahan Freight name, not as a favor to Margaret, not as a tribute to Ethan, changing the branding on every truck, warehouse sign, and operating document across the country would have cost a ridiculous amount of money. It wasn't worth it. The day Margaret moved out of the suburban estate that had symbolized the family's status for generations, she called me. You won. Her voice sounded 10 years older. I was sitting beside a floor-to-ceiling window reviewing amendments to the employee retirement plan. Margaret, this was never a competition. Easy for someone who started life at the finish line to say. In the background, movers dragged heavy boxes across the floor. When Ethan was a boy, whenever his football team lost, he would hide in the locker room and refuse to come home, she said suddenly. His father was stubborn. He would sit in the car and smoke and wait. He never went inside to comfort him. Neither did I. I would stand outside the locker room door and ask Ethan what time practice started the next morning. I said nothing, maybe. She was quiet for a long time. Maybe I taught him too early that failure was something this family could never let anyone see. Maybe that is why he became willing to do anything to hide it. Maybe, but adults are still responsible for their choices. Silence again. Evelyn, do you hate me? She was the second person in recent weeks to ask me that question. Margaret, my calendar is very full. I closed the file in front of me. I don't have time to hate you. A strange, fragile laugh came through the phone. Yes, somehow that is much worse. The call ended. Madison spent a month under a strict internal audit because she had concealed an improper personal relationship with the CEO and had been involved in parts of the undisclosed related party process. Her career at Callahan was over, but she had later provided critical evidence that prevented further losses, so the board chose not to pursue additional legal action against her. The last time I saw her was in the underground parking garage. She wore flats and carried a cardboard box filled with personal belongings. She passed me, took 2 steps, then turned around. Evelyn, I stopped. Yes, that black couture dress. I looked at her bare face. A small, relieved smile appeared on hers. You were right. It always suited you better. Keep it. Why? Because once something has been dragged through someone else's mess, I don't want it back. She stared at me for half a second. Then her eyes reddened, and she smiled. It wasn't victory. It wasn't some dramatic reconciliation between 2 women who had suddenly become friends. It was simply the last, almost insignificant moment of understanding between 2 women who no longer had any reason to tear each other apart over the same terrible man. One afternoon in early winter, Nathan placed a gold-embossed invitation to an annual finance summit on my desk. You can finally appear under the name Evelyn Carter in front of every camera on Wall Street. I glanced at it. Do I have to go? Technically, no. Then I am not going. If your grandfather were alive, watching you waste this kind of networking opportunity would probably make him rise from the grave just to revise your schedule. Unfortunately for him, the deadline to revise his will has passed. Nathan took back the invitation with a sigh, legally airtight. Someone knocked twice. Olivia leaned halfway through the door. 3rd quarter review in 5 minutes. I know, she didn't leave. Instead, she folded her arms and looked at Nathan. Are you trying to drag our famously antisocial boss into another boring industry event? As chief counsel and family advisor, I consider it a professional responsibility. Your professional responsibility is litigation, not matchmaking. Then I am failing at matchmaking with remarkable professionalism. Olivia rolled her eyes and shut the door, watching the 2 of them argue. I lifted my coffee and smiled. That ordinary ease, the freedom to joke about something unimportant, had once felt like a luxury I would never have again. No one was whispering that I was stupid until I started to believe it. No one was standing beside my hospital bed, calculating what they could inherit from me. There was only too much work, strong coffee, a quarterly review already running 5 minutes late, and one name I could finally carry for the rest of my life without apology. Evelyn Carter. The divorce judgment became final on a cold, rainy day in New York. My attorney delivered the last legally binding document to my office. Ethan had already signed the final page. His signature, once bold and controlled, looked rougher than it had on the one-sided agreement from a year earlier. Unsteady, almost fragile. I didn't blink. I uncapped my pen. Evelyn Carter. One clean stroke after another. My phone lit up. A message from Ethan. I hope you are happy. Even now, he had managed to make himself sound like the injured party. I didn't delete it. I didn't answer either. I blocked the number permanently. The next file placed on my desk was Alderidge's global acquisition plan for the coming quarter. I had just opened the first page when the front desk called. "Miss Carter, a courier just delivered a box from a Mr. Callahan." My hand paused over the document. "What kind of box?" "No note. It is very light." 10 minutes later, security set it on the carpet in my office. I cut through the tape. Inside were a few small things I had left behind in the downtown apartment. A novel I had never finished. 2 cheap ceramic mugs Ethan and I had bought in college. A photograph of us outside the university library. And on top sat the pair of cream-colored heels that had once been left by the front door. The same shoes I had moved aside without a second thought. I stared at them for 2 full seconds. Nathan happened to walk in. For once, genuine confusion appeared on his usually unreadable face. "Are those yours?" "Number." "Then why did he send them to you?" I picked up the note tucked beneath one shoe. One line, handwritten in crooked English. "I finally learned to check what belongs to whom." I started laughing. I laughed so hard my eyes watered. Nathan looked even more confused, as though he had walked into an absurdist stage play. "Do you want me to call housekeeping?" "Yes." I picked up the cream-colored heels and dropped them into his arms. "Put them in the charity donation bin downstairs. These shoes, those shoes." Nathan sighed and held them by the heels as though they were hazardous evidence. When I graduated at the top of my class from Harvard Law School, I did not imagine the peak of my legal career would involve disposing of the other woman's shoes for a managing principal. Life is unpredictable, Nathan. Career paths even more so. The door closed again. My office returned to silence. The heat was warm against the winter chill. Rain traced long lines down the enormous windows, dividing and reshaping the Manhattan skyline beyond them. A year earlier, on another rainy day, I had sat at a cold dining table feeling like a prisoner waiting for a sentence. I thought that divorce agreement would rip my life out by the roots. In my previous life, I had believed something even more foolish. I thought losing Ethan Callahan meant losing my entire world. It took dying once to understand the truth. What had destroyed me was never simply his decision to leave. It was the way I had repeatedly cut away pieces of myself in the name of love. My name, my time, my dignity, my money, my right to choose. I had placed all of it in the hands of a man who had never deserved that power, and then I had called that self-erasure love. I returned to the investment plan in front of me. On the final page, I signed my name with deliberate care. Evelyn Carter. The rain was still falling outside. But this time, I wasn't sitting in a dark room waiting for someone to decide whether I belonged there. I didn't need anyone to take me home. Wherever I stood on my own terms was already mine. Let's discuss Ryan Hale, a man who treated loyalty like a subscription service he could cancel whenever someone needier came along. He stood at that gala, frowning at his fiancée, demanding she be nicer to the woman who was actively dismantling her life. "Brooke's already nervous enough tonight," he said, as if Rachel's job was to regulate the emotions of every fragile soul who wandered into their orbit. Ryan didn't love Brooke. He didn't even love Rachel. He loved being the hero in whatever story made him feel most important that week. He spent years using Rachel's intelligence, her model, her late nights, her patience, and called it partnership. When she finally walked away, he didn't mourn losing her. He panicked because the demo stopped working, and the board started asking questions only she could answer. Even then, his first instinct wasn't to apologize. It was to ask her to come back to the office. Not home. The office, because in his mind, she was never a wife. She was the unpaid CTO who also happened to wear his ring. And Brooke. Oh, Brooke. The woman who came back to a family she'd never truly belonged to and decided the fastest way in was to remove the woman already standing there. She played the victim so convincingly that she almost believed it herself, right up until the wedding fell apart, and she realized she'd traded her dignity for a man who couldn't even pay the remaining vendor deposits. She climbed into Rachel's seat at the dinner table, wore Rachel's dress, accepted Rachel's ring. Still in its original setting, by the way, because Ryan couldn't even be bothered to buy a new one, and then acted shocked when everyone noticed she was wearing borrowed clothes in someone else's life. And then there is the family. Graham and Diane, who spent years telling Rachel to be the mature one, to understand, to step aside, to make room for the daughter who just returned. They only called her home when the wedding collapsed and the company crumbled, and suddenly everyone remembered who'd been holding things together all along. Too late. By then, Rachel was miles away, building her own company, signing her own contracts, and answering phone calls from her father with the most devastating question in the English language. If nothing had gone wrong today, would you still be calling me? This is what I want you to hear tonight, loves. Some people will only value you when you become expensive to lose. They'll discount your contributions, dismiss your pain, and treat your presence like permanent background noise. Until the day you turn off the lights, take your talent with you, and suddenly the whole system crashes. And then they'll call it a crisis. But it is not a crisis. It is just the bill coming due. Rachel didn't destroy Ryan. She just stopped subsidizing his delusions. She stopped being the silent partner in a company that treated her like an external contractor. She stopped letting family be a word that meant her sacrifice and everyone else's comfort. And when she finally walked into that boardroom as the person controlling the debt, when Ethan realized who he'd actually been negotiating with, there was no screaming, no revenge. Just one woman calmly explaining the terms of his own survival. She took her name back. She took her model back. She took her future back. And she did it without becoming bitter, without becoming cold, without losing the fundamental decency that made her great. She didn't burn the house down. She just stopped paying the mortgage. The story's told. She walked out of that gala with her head high, her ring in his palm, and a future so bright she didn't need to look back once. The company survived. The employees kept their jobs. And Rachel. She became the person she was always supposed to be. Not someone's wife. Not someone's safety net. Not someone's last resort. Just herself. Now it is your turn. Are you ready to stop being the cheapest thing in the room and start charging what you are actually worth? I am Nova. Sweet dreams tonight. And tomorrow, rise from the ashes. Reborn.